first edition of Tony Miller's Message. Here we are with Captain Miller of our Fire Prevention Division. Today's topic is these permission to enter for fire investigation forms. These forms are being placed in all of our engines, the duty chief vehicle, the ops vehicle, fire chief vehicle, and fire prevention. You may be thinking that this really only applies to fire prevention and the duty chiefs, but it really does apply to all of us. Just for a real quick background, we're only allowed on somebody else's property with three different conditions. One, exigent circumstances, which means essentially for us there's a fire and we don't have to have permission to go on to somebody else's property to extinguish the fire. The other is either permission from the property owner or the person who has control of the property, and the third would be a warrant. Once on the property legally, we actually have an obligation, a legal obligation, to conduct a fire cause investigation. And once we leave the property, the only way we can get back on legally is either with permission or with a warrant. This has actually been affirmed by Supreme Court decisions. So normally after a structure fire, we do leave a crew on scene for the primary purpose of the fire watch, to make sure we don't have a rekindle or to make sure the fire was completely extinguished. The other is to keep the scene secure. If the property owner is not there, making sure that nobody else is entering the property and protecting their valuables. And then the third element is to be able to maintain control of the property to be able to continue to do the fire investigation. And often the fire investigator may not be there initially. Fortunately, Captain Miller arrives early on in the scene and often helps with the fire suppression efforts. What we want to do is make sure we get these forms filled out and signed. He'll explain this in a minute. Because sometimes the property owner leaves the scene to go be with neighbors, find another place to live, or out with the Red Cross. So it's important for us to all know how to do this. So what I'm going to do is turn this over to Captain Miller. He can explain the form and why we're doing it.
Before I get started on the actual form itself, I just want to remind everybody that when we go out on a fire, we're there to do our job, but we're also there because somebody's had the worst day of their life and have lost a lot of their belongings, maybe loss of life or even an animal. So just remember to be patient, sympathetic to their needs, and remember that we're there to assist them at whatever they may need. And when that comes to the form, we actually may need to be assisting them on filling this out. As much as we can possibly do that. We can't initial it for them, but we can at least read things out for them, write some things out for them, but they need to initial it and sign it. It's very important that they do that themselves so that they understand and they're acknowledging that. I'm going to start out with the beginning of this, and it just talks about I, Tony Miller, willingly and of my own free will give permission to fire investigators, the investigation team of the Oregon State Fire Marshal and Oregon State Police and Fire Department to enter the property I own, rent, and lease. This is a very important question. It's at the top one. And the reason why that is up there, why we have own, rent, and lease, is because it's important to have each member that may be involved in a structure have and sign their own form. So like on the Argo fire, we actually had somebody who lived downstairs who was a renter, and the building owner lived upstairs, and he owned both upstairs and downstairs. But we cannot enter the downstairs apartment without actually getting permission in writing from the renter. And we technically cannot enter the premises without permission from the owner upstairs. So when we show up on a fire, we're there, we have a right and a obligation, a state obligation, to actually investigate that fire. Our job is to go in and figure out origin and cause of that fire. That is very important, and we have a right to do that. But it's always nice to get this form signed ahead of time. And so that's the reason why it's going to be staged in your vehicles. The property, under the next question that's underneath there, is where the property is located at. So it's real important to actually write that address in there. And to make sure that when you do that, each individual box is checked and initialed by them. And if you go down through the form, make sure that you actually read each individual question to them or have them read each one of them and understand each individual question that's on here, because every one of them is very pertinent and important, and they have been put on this form for a particular reason. So it's real important to make sure that that gets done. At the bottom and down in there, it says that there's a signature. Make sure that you get the signature. Make sure that you have a couple witnesses involved. that can actually attest that they actually read each individual question and that they understand them, or that you read them to them, because they are having a bad day. Also, on the bottom down here, it says print their name. Make sure that you print their name or have them print their name. Make sure that you rewrite that address. I also, down here at the bottom, it actually has an email address and a birth date. It's very important that you get the birth date on there. That goes to, just in case, if this could this could actually go to legal sides of it, or litigation side of it, that we have that for references to be able to pull up records on them. Make sure that you just fill out all these boxes, and then remember, every day that they're out there on this fire, or we're out there on this fire, that they have had a bad day, and just remember to be sympathetic to those needs.
Hey, thank you, Captain Miller. I just want to kind of go over this, make sure I understand. So at the top, we end up asking the property, whoever has control of the property, to get their name in there. But what it kind of confuses on here is it says the property I own, rent, or lease. How do we know who has the authority to give us permission to go into a property? For instance, if I'm renting a house and I'm the sole occupant of that house, do I actually sign this to allow you to come in, or do we have to find the property owner to sign it to allow the fire investigators to come in?
No, the actual renter is the actual person who is in, I guess you want to say, living in the place,
Okay.
or that is their residence.
Okay,
So they have the right for that.
whoever has control of the property
Correct.
is the one. So then, if I own a property, then I can't give you permission then to investigate a fire in a piece of property that I rent to somebody else.
That is correct.
Okay, so we get all this information. I guess the second question I have is, why not just give this to the person and say, here, just initial all these? Why are we actually taking the time and actually reading this to the person and asking if they understand before they initial?
So each one of these questions are very, very important, and then we have to make sure and do our due diligence to make sure that they understand that question, and that we're also there to be able to maybe answer some questions for them. So let's just say, I understand this search may be used in a court of law. Well, what does that mean? So we can be there to actually answer that question. We can say, well, if we found something that may be used in the court of law, and you understand that. And that's the reason why we have that in there.
So does that mean that you suspect that somebody set the fire, or is that even used in an accidental fire?
It can be used in any or. And this comes down to even like if we thought the toaster may have caught the fire.
Okay.
So that is something that may be used in the court of law. Not that they intentionally caught the toaster on fire, but the toaster may have started the fire. So
Okay.
this information is there that they understand that. And that's the reason why we are there to watch and make sure that we can answer any questions they may
Okay,
have.
so let me follow up on your toaster scenario there. Because you say on this form that I give permission for items to be removed from the property to be tested. So if in your scenario, you would take that toaster, and you understand the search can be used in a court of law. So potentially then, the insurance company may want to, I'm going to use that term, subrogate, go back on the manufacturer of the toaster to basically be reimbursed for their claim. So, does this also give permission for the insurance or any other agencies to come in?
No, that is independent on the insurance agencies.
Okay, so this says giving permission for the police and others in helping. So, if I understand you correctly, is we can have the police come in, we can have other investigators come in to assist, but generally with the insurance investigator, that's going to be a requirement of their policy.
That is
That
correct.
they have to cooperate. Okay? Only because this happened to me once, I'm not signing that. Now what?
So when something like that actually happens, what we do is we basically say, okay, that's fine. We understand that. You do not have to sign this, but we are going to continue on with our investigation. We don't need their permission long as we keep the fire scene and we stay there. So long as we don't release it, we don't need this. It's just a legality to help us out if we ever decide to leave.
So if you have, let me take a larger building, and you think you may have to come back day after day, it may take several days, and whoever has control of the property says, I'm not signing this. So as soon as the fire department leaves, the only way you get back on is you get an administrative warrant. So it sounds like we'd have to do here in Siuslaw Valley is we need to leave somebody on scene to maintain control of the property while someone, probably you, gets to travel to Eugene and find a judge that's going to sign an affidavit and give you a search warrant, administrative warrant, to come back and continue the investigation. Is that somewhat correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I think this kind of outlines why we're doing these forms and how important it is to get these done. It only takes a few minutes, gives us a chance to talk with the property owner or the renter, whoever had control of the property. And if we make this just as a routine form, it'll make the job a lot easier for our investigators when they arrive. Anything else you'd like to add?
Just remember that we are public servants. We go out and we are out doing something, and we're working together with them as a whole. And getting this information ahead of time really saves a couple steps for the fire investigator. And to remember just to be patient with them and understand that this is a bad day for them, for the most part.
Great. Thanks for watching. We'll probably have another chapter of Miller's Message coming up fairly soon.